this is your baxi 800, which has been connected to a weather sensor, and I'm going to give a brief description on how to use the boiler and how the weather compensation works. Now this knob here, you'll see the picture of a radiator. This is how to control the radiator temperature. So the higher we turn this knob, the warmer the radiators will be in relation to the temperature outside. Now, how the weather comp works is the colder it is outside, then the hotter the radiators will be. Now, you begin to understand it as I go through this. So I'm going to set this to 40, which is standard, but ideally we want to turn this knob as low as we can. It'll become a point where you turn it so low that the house will not heat up. The house will lose more heat than the radiators will provide. So we need to find the point where the lowest point we can turn it while the house is still getting warm. The way the weather comp works, it follows this graph, which are called the weather curves. So the number we're turning the dial on the front of the boiler are these numbers around here, and each number relates to a curve. So we've set ours to 40, so we're looking at this curve if we've set it to 40. Now what we've got here is the outside temperature, whatever the temperature is outside, and the temperature of the radiators. So if we follow curve 40, when it is 15 degrees outside, our radiators will be at 40 degrees. And then when the temperature drops to 10 degrees outside, our radiators will be up at 55 degrees. And then on a day like today, when it's 5 degrees outside, our radiators will go a bit hotter, up to 70 degrees. And then anything below zero, the radiators will be at 80 degrees. So if we were to turn the knob on the front of the boiler down to 30, we'd be following this curve instead, which would mean that the radiators would be cooler in relation to outside. So for example, whereas on curve 40, on the weather's 10 degrees, we'd have 55 degrees radiators. If we had curve 30 at 10 degrees outside, we'd be looking at around about 47 degrees or so. So the lower we set the number on the boiler, the lower the curve gets, then the cooler the radiators will be in relation. So we really want to have the lowest curve we can, but still having the house warm up, because the lower the flow and return temperatures to and from the radiators and to and from the boiler, the more efficient the boiler will be burning gas, so the more units of heat you will get per unit of gas, and the cooler the flue gases will be, which means that you're throwing less heat straight out the flue and more heat's being recovered from the burnt gas, and is the boiler's condensing more basically. So once again we can change this knob from 0 all the way up to 90, and we can see then we can go from curve 0 all the way up to curve 90. So the lower we set this, the better. So I'm going to set it down to 40. But if you find that the house is not heating up, you can turn it up a bit, but I want you to turn it down as low as you can, and then leave it for a day or two, see how comfortable the house is, and then you can adjust it then. You might find that because the radiators are cooler, that you might need to turn the heating on earlier in the morning. So if you normally have the heating coming on at 6 o'clock because you want the house warm at 6:30, you might need to turn the timer to come on at maybe 5:45. Just so, because the radiators are cooler, it will take longer for them to heat the house. Like this other knob is the hot water knob. It's just simple. So this is basically the temperature of the water coming out of your hot taps. So if you've got the kids here and you don't want to burn their hands, you can just turn it down to a nice temperature, maybe 45 degrees or so, and if you want some really hot water to do the dishes, you can turn it up as high as you want. Now, it doesn't really matter where you leave this, okay, so you can turn this one up and down however many times you want. Now, we've also got a pressure gauge on the front of the boiler. Now, this should be reading between 1 and 2, ideally 1.5. If the pressure does drop below 1, you've got instructions on the side of the boiler of what to do. But we've got the filling loop under the boiler, which is this green lever, which is on the right hand side of the boiler. And if we pull the lever down, it'll allow pressure into the boiler. So that's how you top up your boiler. Okay, every time the boiler is topped up, you're adding fresh water into the boiler, which may cause corrosion in the system, so we need to let your installer know every time you're topping up the boiler, just in case there's a problem somewhere. We've also got this magnetic filter here, which is on the return of the heating. This has to be cleaned out every year on the annual service. And also the boiler's got a 10-year warranty, so this boiler does need to be serviced every year in order to keep it. The sensor should be sited on an outside wall 2 meters above ground level, and it should be facing north or northeast. It should not be facing west or south, because the sun will affect the readings. Now, this we've got in here the weather sensor clipped inside the flue, which is great because we've got a southwest facing wall here, so this is the way to get around it. And this is plugged in to the boiler through the air intake of the flue. If we remove the case from the boiler, we can see it's coming through the air intake, and it's been run around the boiler, and it's plugged into the printed circuit board right here. If we didn't get on with the weather comp, we could always unwire it from the PCB. This is the room thermostat. It's showing you what the temperature of the room is, the temperature we're aiming for, and whether the thermostat is calling for heat or not. If the top number is higher than the bottom number, then we'll be calling for heat, and if we drop the number below the room temperature, then the boiler will stop calling for heat and the flame symbol will go out. Now, the comfortable temperature for most people is 21 degrees, but if we want to be energy efficient, it's been said that for every 1 degrees we drop it, you're saving around about 6% on the gas. It's obviously different in every house for every system, but the lower we can set this, the more efficient and less gas you're going to be using. And what you will find is the lower the flow temperature to the radiators, it'll give you a much more comfortable heat in the house. The room temperatures are not going to fluctuate so much, they're not going to go up and down, up and down. The lower the temperature of the radiators is, then the lower you can kind of set this. So you might find that 20 degrees will be, or even 19 degrees will be just as comfortable as 21 once we've got the low flow temperatures going on the radiators from the weather curve with the lower flow temperature to the rads. So we'll set this to 20. Again, if you don't get on with this, you're not warm enough, we can always turn this up, but then we want to set this as low as possible. Now, just another point, the radiator in the same room as the thermostat needs to have the thermostat set all the way up to 5, or ideally there should be no thermostat on the radiator, because what can happen is the radiator might get up to temperature, the thermostatic radiator valve will turn off, but the clock will continue to call for heat from the boiler because the thermostat itself is not getting up to temperature, so they're actually conflicting with one another. The room stat, it should be sighted away from any radiators, any corners, any cold spots, and it should be in the heart of the house, usually the hallway. Now, a quick word on the thermostatic radiator valves. Now, we've balanced the system using the valve on the right, which is the lock shield valve. So on every radiator you'll have a thermostat, you'll have a lock shield. Now, you do not touch or turn the lock shield because you'll send the system out of balance. What we're doing, we're trying to get each radiator heating up at the same rate, so the return water to the boiler is the correct temperature, which is also make things more efficient and make everything heat up at the same time. Now you can turn the thermostat up and down as much as you want. Now this doesn't control the temperature of the radiator, it actually controls the temperature of the room. So each number represents a room temperature. So we turn this to how warm we want the room. So 3 degrees is number 3 is just a mild warm temperature, which if the cooler rooms like the bedrooms you might want to set on number 3, it might be around about 18 degrees. So what will happen, the radiator will be hot until the room reaches 18 degrees and then the radiator will shut off. Number 4 will be warmer again, it might be 21 degrees, so you might want to set your living rooms to number 4. So what will happen, the radiator will be hot until it reaches 21 degrees, then the radiator will shut off. And then when the room drops below 21 degrees, the radiator will come back on. And number 5 is it's basically the radiator's on all the time. So this number we generally only use if the radiator is in a wet area like the bathroom, or if it's in the same area as the main room thermostat. So the room with a room thermostat, which is usually the hallway, should either not have a thermostat, or if it is a thermostat and a radiator, should always be left on number 5. Now the radiator will not heat up any quicker on number 5 as it will on number 1. The radiator will heat up just as quick, it'll just shut off earlier the lower the number. So we try and find what temperature you want each room, and then you can turn the thermostat to what number you want and then just leave them then, and the rooms will all be at the correct temperature and also be saving you money. The system has been flushed and it's been filled with Fernox F1. If the heating system ever needs to be drained, the inhibitor needs to be redosed, which means add in another bottle of Fernox ideally.